What is going on? All right. Hello, and welcome everybody to the episode of Pod Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin, and this is episode 507. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Stacy. That is at StacyPatton89 on Twitter. Stacy, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. It's a beautiful day.
I wish I could say it's beautiful, but unfortunately here in New York, it's about 9,000 degrees, so not so beautiful. We are joined by first-time guest on the pod. His name is Sam Quinn. You can follow him at Sam Quinn CBS on Twitter. You may have figured out where he works based on his Twitter at. He works for CBS. Sam, how you doing?
507 episodes. I think this is the longest running podcast I've ever been on. I'm honored.
Oh, well, 507, we figured, this is the perfect time to get Sam on. So
I should have been on for number 500. Did you guys blow it out? Did you do something special?
We couldn't. It was in the middle of the playoffs. The Knicks were still playing. So we were I think it was between game 5 and 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. So it was kind of like, I guess we can't really do anything special here. But we will talk about the Knicks Eastern Conference Finals trip and a lot more. But before we do that, I do have to make a few announcements. The first being that the Strickland has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you've not done so already, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.thestrict.land. There's a link that'll take you to the merchandise store, and there's all kinds of cool stuff on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we got it. Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland's podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to Takes from Obvious Bozos, a podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, a.k.a. Doug, along with Zach Blatter, and you get access to the Strickland Discord with conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, my solo pod, which is no longer a solo pod. I host that with YC now, where we rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Murno, one of the best in the business. And you get access to Strictly NFL, which you guessed it, is a podcast about the NFL that is hosted by Constantine Metricos and Desmond Novak. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and a $100 tier. There's a variety of additional benefits, like listening on our pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you. So without further ado, let's get started. The NBA Finals concluded yesterday, and obviously, congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder for winning. But this is a Knicks podcast, and most people listening to this podcast do not care about the Oklahoma City Thunder, although we do have an alumni in the form of Isaiah Hartenstein. So the NBA Finals concluded last night. Congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder and Knicks alumni Isaiah Hartenstein, who betrayed us last offseason. But this being a Knicks podcast, we're more focused on the Knicks, and a big thing happened that will affect the Eastern Conference next season, which was Tyrese Halliburton's injury. He seemingly, I think we got confirmation on it that he tore his Achilles, ruptured his Achilles very early in the game. I think it was probably like midway through the first quarter. I don't even know what to really make of the Eastern Conference right now, because Halliburton has his Achilles issue, Tatum has had his Achilles issue, and then on top of that, so you have these seismic injuries that shake up the conference. On top of that, you also get this huge Desmond Bane swing that Orlando has taken, which happened, what was that reported after game 1 of the NBA Finals? So you have these crazy kind of shifts. I guess, Sam, I'll just throw it to you. Obviously the injury is devastating for Indiana, and I can't even imagine what it was like being on their sideline and having to process that in real time and then compete for an NBA championship in the highest stakes game you're ever going to play. But I guess what if you're the Knicks, do you think this changes anything about how you would go about this offseason? Or do you think they were kind of so locked in with how tight the cap numbers are and how pot committed they are to a lot of the players on the roster already that this doesn't actually change too much just for the Knicks specifically?
Yeah, I think you're sort of in the same boat where you feel like the Eastern Conference is gettable, and it was before Halliburton got hurt, just because Tatum going in, I think, was more significant to the Knicks. I know the Knicks beat the Celtics and lost to the Pacers. I don't like doing the shooting variance fluky thing, blah, blah, blah. I think it's one of those things where you kind of have to acknowledge the Knicks won those games. It happened. But you can be honest that the way that it happened is not necessarily replicable. like if those two teams with those rosters and at full strength met next year, you probably would have favored the Celtics, even if the Knicks were, even though the Knicks won this year. The Celtics going down was more significant to me than the Pacers, because you kind of go the other way with the Pacers, and it's like the Knicks were outplayed in that series and they deservingly lost. Game 1 was right there. And if they had taken game 1, you host game 7. At that point, you feel pretty good. I think the Pacers were like roughly on their tier or slightly above it, whereas the Celtics felt, at least for most of this season, like they were just hovering above everybody in the East. I don't know that Halliburton's injury changes that much from how you function. I think it's sort of the same thing where you think we have a real window here. You want to improve as much as possible. I don't think we're going to see anything drastic. Not much pick flexibility, not much cap flexibility. Looking at their sheet, I've got them like $8 million below the second apron with 4 spots to fill. We can talk about some of the ways they can play with that. I think the goal is going to be open up the tax mid-level, try to get a backup point guard or backup center in there. I don't think anything drastic is probably coming, but I think this just underscores the rarity of this opportunity, right? Like Cleveland is going to enter next year probably as the heavy East favorite.
Yeah,
we don't know what they're going to look like because they have second apron issues. Orlando's there. If Philly's healthy, great, but healthy Philly is a myth. This is right there for them.
Yeah,
there's also Orlando and Detroit, right? I mean, people will mention Detroit, Cade maybe taking another leap, and Orlando made the move, right? So
yeah. So just looking at the odds, I know I looked at it this morning because I'm a degenerate. FanDuel had the Cavs at -800 to win the title. Knicks were -900. Orlando was -1300.
Plus, to be clear.
Oh yeah, plus. Sorry, I don't know why I kept saying minus. Yeah, plus. And actually, Boston was also plus 1300. So kind of surprised that Boston's odds were that high. You talked about the Tatum injury. I'm kind of like, one of the things I had a really tough time articulating to people throughout the season, because it's like, the Knicks make these big moves, right? They send out all the picks for Bridges, and then they kind of cobble up the remaining value assets that they have to get Karl Anthony Towns. And so you're going through this season, and there was this kind of just this malaise with the fan base about the team, where it's like, they're good, but like, is this really like all this is? And if this is all this is, and Cleveland's up here and Boston's up here, like, what really is this window? And does this window even exist? And what I thought I had like a tough time kind of trying to explain it, and I think this got cleared up because of the Tatum injury in some ways, was like, hey, like, Boston right now, and I tend to agree with you, like, the Knicks won those games, but yeah, going down 20 twice on the road, going down 14 at home, like, these are not sustainable ways to win games. But like the Knicks window with this core is presumably around 4 years before you start getting into like, okay, they're going to be in the the repeater tax and all these penalties that come with that. I was like, Boston's going to have to deal with this offseason. Like, this is happening, and even if right now they're better and they're way better, let's say, like, that roster is not coming back the following season, and I think people just did not grasp that, at least not in the Knicks Twitter universe, and honestly, I think a lot of broad NBA fans still hadn't like really grasped the severity of being a second apron team, and also Boston has the entire unknown of like a new ownership group coming in, and it was like Tatum getting hurt all of a sudden. I think people like really started to be like, oh wow, no, this is real. Like, they're going to have to dump salary, and even if Drew Holiday is lesser than he was, or Porzingis is lesser than he was, these are still good players that you're potentially going to have to lose and downgrade on. I mean, they're looking at a situation where they might be like, maybe they can't bring back a guy like Luke Cornett, and that might not seem like a big deal. But if you're going to lose Porzingis and you're going to lose a Cornett, and now you're back to like what your big rotation is, maybe Horford comes back, Neemias Queta, Xavier Tillman, like, these are the issues that I think face them. And so I'm kind of like, I'm very interested. I think there is going to be a lot of movement via trade, I think, this offseason. But I am interested to just see like how I almost wonder if Boston had won again, if their ownership group would have been like, I get like it's probably a terrible look if we come in and we start trading players to dump salary, like even if that makes sense. And now I think this has been forced upon, or not even forced upon them. It's just kind of like, well, now we can do it. And to your point, I think that has increased a lot of just like variability in the conference.
I think Boston would have kept the team together if Tatum had been healthy, even if they'd lost to the Knicks. The reason for that is their books were set up to do that. The way the second apron works, without getting too specific, is you're basically, it's set up for you to be over the second apron for 2 years in a 5-year window. This was the first year for Boston. Next year would have been the second year. And then Porzingis would have expired. So my thought had been the idea was going to be keep the team together this year and next year, let Porzingis expire, trade Drew Holiday for a center, and start Peyton Pritchard from there. That's what I think their plan was. Tatum getting hurt changed everything because now you can't afford to waste a second apron year when Tatum is out because you're going to need that second apron year when he's back. So that really is what forced the change. And like, I think it could be more significant than even Drew or Porzingis because you're just not getting much for those guys, right? Like Holiday is pretty explicitly on a negative contract. I can't trust Porzingis to stay healthy. I would not be totally surprised if they sniffed around on Jaylen Brown or Derek White. I think it would take a lot, especially in the wake of the Desmond Bane trade. But I think if they could make a move where, like, if Toronto, who is apparently calling around about a lot of different stars, really wants to make a big swing, if the Raptors call you and say, we'll save you $10 million in salary and we'll give you 4 first-round picks for Jaylen Brown, I think they might consider it. I don't know what version of Boston is coming back, and I think that's important because we're not just dealing with a 1-year window here. Like you said, the Knicks are planning the way their books were set up for 4 years. We just went through the first. This is going to be the second. They're going to stay below the second apron this year, and then they're going to do their 2 second apron years after that. That's the window. You have 3 more shots at this. We don't know what Boston's going to look like when they come back. We don't know what Indiana's going to look like when they come back. And Cleveland is a little bit further along their apron journey than the Knicks are. Cleveland might be able to duck the second apron this year. I'm not sure. If they do, they're going to do it with a worse team. So whether it's this year or in the next several, I think the Knicks have a pretty clear window here unless like Detroit fast forwards and is better than we think, or Orlando does, or like some surprising star trade happens. But as it stands right now, like I personally think Cleveland is in a tier by itself as the best team in the East. Anything else is possible for the Knicks. You can win 55 games and be the number 2 seed. And I think where that malaise you mentioned comes from is I think it was pretty obvious. And I don't want to be the guy who dumps on Tibbs because Tibbs did a lot of invisible things that we can't really quantify but clearly helped. They had a culture because of Tibbs. But that said, they left a lot of very obvious meat on the bone, right? This team with Karl Anthony Towns at center was designed to be this 5-out offensive monster, and it never was. The reason for that, I think more than anything, it's 2 things. Number one, Josh Hart can't shoot. Josh Hart not being able to shoot is not a fatal flaw for him as a player. It probably is a fatal flaw for him as a starter. I thought they should have started Deuce McBride. Maybe Landry Shamet should have gotten a look as the season went along. I don't know what exactly you were going to do, but you needed a shooter in that spot so you can actually benefit from being a 5-out offense. Okay, if you're going to start Josh Hart, and again, I don't think you should have, you have to find more ways to hide his limitations as a shooter. I didn't think they used him enough as a screener, especially as the season progressed. That's something that they've dabbled with a little bit, and him and Brunson have a chemistry that like I think they could have built on. They didn't do nearly enough with that. And the idea of bringing in a more creative offensive coach is even if the roster is the same, there is more juice to be squeezed out of this talent. And I think if they can do that, they have a real path to the finals in the near future.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think this is something a lot of we've definitely talked a lot about on this pod.
A few times.
I do want to take this back a little bit to what you're saying, which I agree with, by the way, that you play the series next year again. Celtics would be favored if Tatum didn't get hurt. You play it 10 times. Celtics probably still win 6 or 7. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? The Knicks went down 20 points multiple times. They had to basically rely on Jalen Brunson heroics. But I think if you think about that meat left on the bone, that's, I think, the big conversation, because people like, we beat the Celtics, right? What more could you ask for from Tibbs? I think before the playoffs, if you told me and Shwin blindfolded that the Knicks are going to beat the Celtics, neither of us would have said we need to fire Tibbs.
I'd have told you to pass the joint.
But I think I think one of the fundamental questions, like when people criticize the roster, you can talk about add a backup point guard, add some depth at the wing. I think a big thing that has come to the forefront is you have two starters that are subpar defenders, and they are your star players. You have to play them a lot. I ideally want to play them together. And some people feel like, especially given Cat's salary, that is just a fundamental blocker that they can't overcome. How would you kind of categorize that, especially in the context of the Tibbs conversation?
I think it's a reasonable criticism. I would just ask, like, how do you fix it, right? What are you trading one of those guys for that makes your team better? If Kevin Durant was on the table for Cat, and I don't think he ever was, and I don't think the Knicks were all that interested, maybe you could have talked me into that, right? But remember, they had like similar issues before when they had Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. Like, it's not like you can just say, poof, we're going to trade Karl Anthony Towns for a guy who's going to do similar stuff on offense and be better on defense. Those guys kind of just don't exist. I think when you're talking about building a roster in the NBA, especially at the highest levels, you don't really get to pick your stars, right? You don't really get to pick who's going to be available for you to trade for, especially at the cost that the Knicks paid, because they only gave up one pick to get Towns. You don't get to decide who your best players are. You kind of just bring in the most talented guys and you start from there. If they could trade Towns for somebody who wasn't a defensive liability, I might do that. But I don't know that such a trade really exists. So you kind of have to be thinking, how do we maximize our roster within that context? You have two defensive liabilities. So what are you going to do? Number one, first and foremost, you have to maximize the offense. Because if you're going to be an average defense or worse, you can't be the fifth best offense or the seventh best offense. You have to be the second best offense. You have to not only be a good regular season offense and not one where it's like, oh, they get a bunch of offensive rebounds, but they're like, average in the half court. No, none of that. You got to be a killer pick and roll team. You've got to actually maximize both of these guys, and you've got to make a million threes. They didn't do any of that stuff. Number two, as far as the defense goes, I think there are steps you can take with the players that you have to maybe mitigate some of that, right? Like the thing we saw that Tibbs did in the Indiana series was start Mitchell Robinson. Is that necessarily what I would do full time? I'd experiment with it. I'd probably prefer to have Towns at center and then have a shooter with him. But you can be a pretty good defensive team with Towns as power forward because Minnesota did that, right? Like, it's possible. There is a formula here. I just think what they did wrong for so much of last year was kind of trying to split the difference where it's like, we're not going to be 5 out because Hart can't shoot, but Mitch is out, so we can't be this double big defensive team. You can't be in the middle. You kind of have to go one way or another, and you can mix and match based on matchup. You can change lineups over the course of a game. I'm not saying you have to totally say this is the only way that we play and move forward that way. I didn't feel like the Knicks had an identity for a lot of this year. And I did during the 24 season, right? I felt very clear that I knew who the Knicks were when Isaiah Hartenstein was the center and when they made the OG trade and they had the team that pushed Indiana to 7. This year, I just felt the whole season slipping by, and I never had a sense that the Knicks knew who they were.
So you want the Knicks to get into a polyamorous relationship with starting lineups?
I'm open to it. I mean, Tibbs wouldn't do it. We were calling for it all postseason, right? Like, even Josh Hart, that's the amazing thing. Josh Hart, who was a starter for the Knicks, thought the Knicks should change their starting lineup. You don't hear that very often. Like, let people behind the curtain, like, when you talk to players, most of their opinions about what their team should do is involve them more, right? Like, I've written stories, especially. It's a very hard thing to do when you want to write about bench lineups because the guys on those benches tend to believe, well, I should be starting, so why do I want to help you talk about the bench? Like, it's a funny thing that happens when you start talking to players a little bit more. You realize that's what they think. For Josh Hart to go to Tibbs and say, hey, I think we maybe should do this, and for Tibbs not to do it, that says quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically for like the last 4 months of the season, you could kind of feel it, you could see it, all the numbers bore it out. So, and then obviously the playoff numbers were even worse. It was just a frustrating thing. I want to go back to the double big versus like my suspicion. This is not based on anything other than just how I'm reading the tea leaves. Their suggestion to Tibbs, the front office suggestion reportedly to Tibbs during the Celtics series was, hey, like, you should start Mitch. Like, take Hart out of the starting lineup, start Mitch. And obviously he doesn't go to that until it's 2 games into the Pacers series. Now, whether the Pacers were the right matchup to do that in, I am a little less confident about. And in general, I'm not, like, to your point, I don't think it needs to be like, this is what we do. And I think the best example of this would be like, just look at OKC during the NBA finals, where they were like, are we going to start Hartenstein today? Are we going to like not do the Hartenstein thing? And they just kept mixing and matching and trying to figure it out. And I don't even know if you asked Mark Daigneault today, even after they won the championship, if you were like, hey, do you know what your absolute best 5 was in this series? I don't think he would tell you like with utmost confidence exactly what it was. But it's the idea of like, you kind of work on this stuff through the season, and then when you need to tinker throughout a playoff game or series, you at least have an idea of what those combinations are. And not seeing any of that in the regular season, like, I understand, the Mitchell Robinson injury was a really big issue for the Knicks all year. But what was really frustrating was like, okay, I understand Ariel Hukporti is a rookie draft pick that you made with the 58th pick of the draft. Like, I understand he's a rookie. He's coming over from Europe. Like, he's not going to come in and dominate, right? We understand that. But when you see him play early in the season, we got to see him play a few times, and you can see the normal rookie center stuff where he's like too deep in his drop, or he doesn't know what rotation to make, and all those type of things. But you can still just see like, okay, you see this big, like, genuine athletic center, and the idea for me, and me and Stacy talked about this, going back November, December, where it was like, even if you don't think the kid can play 25 minutes, you can't tell me giving him 10 minutes over Precious Chua and just playing him next to Cat so you get an actual double big look there. See what that looks like, because that guy is the most reasonable facsimile you have to Mitchell Robinson on the roster. And so, like, all of a sudden, now Mitchell Robinson comes back. Even when he was back in the regular season, you don't use it. And then you have to go to it in the playoffs. And it's like, so Cat and Mitch are now just having to work on their chemistry in the middle of like the most, highest leverages games of the season. It's just a tough spot. But I want to get back to the more of the Eastern Conference part of it. Like you talked about Cleveland. You talked about like, you think, I think it's safe to say you feel that the Knicks are like the number 1 contender to Cleveland. And I guess, like, where do you stand on the conference now? Like, Orlando takes this big swing on Desmond Bane. I have a lot of conflicting thoughts on it, where it's like, I understand it, but I think I'm less high on I'm less high on Paolo flat out than it seems like they are. And then, we played a first round series with Detroit. It was a very competitive series. I think it probably shouldn't have been that competitive, and that's not a knock on Detroit. They had a great season, but more like, I think our talent was clearly not being maximized to the fullest. I'm curious, like, do you feel like Orlando has taken a big enough stride just with getting Bane alone that they're in that genuine, they can push Cleveland or New York to maybe take this Eastern Conference? And do you see a path for a team like Detroit or another one of these kind of lower Eastern Conference teams to rise up and get to that level?
Orlando is interesting because they're kind of the anti-Knicks, right? We're talking about how the Knicks have to be the second best offense and the 15th best defense. The Magic, it's reversed. They're going to be a top 3 defense, and the question is, can they get to average on offense? Desmond Bane was the perfect player for them. There was not a better player for what they specifically needed in the entire NBA, unless, like, maybe they could have gotten Devin Booker. But even that, like, there was not a better fit in the entire NBA for them than Desmond Bane, because he has secondary creation, elite shot making, elite shooting, and then like passable defense. They don't have to compromise their defense to improve their offense. I don't know if that makes them contenders. I do think it makes them the best version of themselves. So you bring up Paolo, who you're lower on. This is ultimately, to me, going to come down to how good is Paolo Banchero really? If he is the 8th best player in the NBA, they can win the East. If he is the 18th best player in the NBA, they probably can't. And if he's the 28th best player in the NBA, this whole thing is a disaster. We're going to find that out.
Sorry, Sam. I want to ask one. Do you think Paolo is their best chance at having a top 10 player? I think there's an obvious.
Franz then.
Is Paolo better than Franz right now?
The thing about it is I found it so interesting that both of them this year seem to play better without the other one. And there are obvious reasons for that, right? Like they're both on ball guys who like need to get into a rhythm. Franz can't really shoot. He compromises the spacing for Paolo. Paolo gets guarded, but he's not like a great shooter either from deep. Like I wonder if they might be maximized by splitting them apart. I think Paolo has more upside because I think as good as Franz is as like a pick and roll creator, what he did in like November and December when Paolo was out was like really, really eye-opening.
Yeah, that game against the Lakers, that was crazy.
It really was. I don't think he'll ever have the like tough shot making that Paolo does. Like what Franz does as a pick and roll creator, you could say that there are like 20 players in the NBA who can do that. What Paolo can do as an individual shot creator, that list is smaller. That's like 5, 6, 7 guys if he hits his ceiling. If you're asking me to pick one, I pick Paolo, but I'm not going to judge you for being very high on Franz because what he did when Paolo was hurt was like really, really interesting. And I think got totally washed over when he got hurt himself and Paolo came back and Suggs got hurt and the whole team was a mess. November and December for Franz Wagner were like, I see it. Max contract makes total sense.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but if you wanted to finish on the Orlando point you were making, but
so that's where I'm at, right? Orlando is going to be the best version of themselves, and we're going to see if their star power is good enough to support a supporting cast that is good enough, that has the stuff they need, that is deep, that has the roles and the boxes checked. Detroit, I think it's kind of just going to be a matter of like, number one, does Jaden Ivey, is he capable of being the second scorer? And I think they'll give him every chance to be that. If he's not, when are they ready to take their swing, right? Because they have all their picks. They can make their Desmond Bane trade whenever they want to. But I think the concept of Cade plus Asar plus big man plus shooting around them is going to be really interesting. It's just going to be a matter of, is it interesting in 2026 or is it interesting in 2028? Like Devin Booker is not available right now. I don't think any of us have much faith in that Phoenix situation. I think if Devin Booker were to become available in the near future, that's somebody who makes a ton of sense for Detroit. Or like anybody in that mold of like the elite offensive shooting guard that doesn't kill you on defense. There are not many guys like that. If they can get that guy, or if Jaden Ivey can like be a facsimile of that, he's a different sort of player. He's more of a downhill driver, pick and roll operator than like a tough shot maker like Booker. But like if they can get their offense up, they're a little bit like the Magic, right? Their defense was great down the stretch. The offense was where it was kind of a struggle. Hopefully Ivy can help. And then I kind of look down the conference and like I fall for Philly every year. It's my weakness. I just look at the talent on that team and I'm like, there's so many good players there. Joel Embiid was the MVP 2 years ago. Paul George was an all-NBA player 2 years ago, right? Like there's so much talent on there that if they can just like forget about being healthy all year, if they can be healthy from March through May, they can win the East. So I'm never going to give up on Philly. They're right there. And then you're looking for sleepers, right? Does Atlanta make a big move? Does Toronto make a big move? Somebody is going to improve, whether it's through a big trade or through its, internal improvement. Like, I don't know. What if the Hornets are good? What if Brandon Miller takes a big year 3 leap and LaMelo Ball starts like playing serious basketball instead of carnival basketball? I don't know. Like, I think we're looking at this list right now and we're saying there are 3 or 4 really serious contenders. It never actually plays out that way, does it? Like somebody always emerges. None of us thought Cleveland was going to win 64 this year, but they did. I'm trying to figure out who that surprise team in the East could be, but I think it's going to be somebody.
You think Atlanta's hit their ceiling?
Who's hit their ceiling?
Atlanta. because I think that's a team I've seen mentioned a bit. They have some exciting young guys, Daniels and
the young guy. I think there's still upside there. Like I think Reese Shea is never going to be a star. Reese Shea is going to be a nerd favorite for a long time. Like that dude just does stuff that wins you games. I think Dyson Daniels got a little bit overrated last year, but Jalen Johnson is like universally underrated. I picked him as the Atlanta All-Star last year. I thought he was better than Trae Young. He's gotten hurt in back-to-back years, but like he's really good. The question for them, can they shoot enough, right? Because Daniel's not a great shooter, Jalen Johnson not a great shooter, and Reese Shea not a great shooter. Okongwu making some threes down the stretch, pretty interesting development, and if he still does, now we might be cooking with gas here. I'm really watching the Trae Young extension negotiations because given like the stats and the stature, he seems like somebody who's going to go to the Hawks and say 5-year max. And if I were the Hawks, I would say no, thank you. So that's going to be pretty interesting. I wouldn't even like mind it that much if they explored a trade. I don't know if there's one out there, but I like Atlanta short and long term. I just don't quite know what fits together yet.
I think Orlando trading for Bane is like the because I feel like people are like, oh, how can we get Trae Young to the Magic? How can we like it was like one of those teams. If I'm Atlanta, I'm just not even talking about an extension with him because I think he will demand, like to your point, he's a guy that's gonna be like, look at these numbers I put up. Your offense doesn't function without me. Like, I deserve the full max. And if you don't present him that full max, I think you're already just like starting the negotiation at a point that's contentious. And I also just wouldn't want to necessarily be tied to Trae Young until I have to be tied to Trae Young. So, and they're also pick encumbered still for these next 2 years. So that's something that they have to consider with any decisions they make. Like trading Trae Young is great potentially, but like if you're getting worse, does that really help you? What's the benefit? So they have a lot of decisions. You know, and obviously Miami, who knows what they're doing? They don't know what they're doing, maybe. So I don't know. The East is pretty interesting.
Can you give me 1 second on Atlanta? I have one more thing I want to say. Their pick encumbering is so interesting because they can almost blackmail the rest of the league. And here's what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Want to trade Trae Young. What the rest of the league is worried about is them trading Trae Young and getting a lot worse because those picks belong to San Antonio and nobody wants the Spurs to get better. So they can kind of threaten teams and be like, yeah, you know, if you don't do this with us, we might dump Trae. And if we dump Trae, you know what that means. Right. So that's kind of interesting to me, but I'm with you. I just don't feel comfortable extending him. Certainly not at the level that he wants. And I think the Desmond Bane trade was a really important reminder of what the league actually values versus what I think most fans think of as important, you know, what the highlights and the numbers suggest, right? Where like Trae Young is thought of as a superstar point guard. Trae Young has been available in trades in the past. And if they could have gotten anything close to what the Grizzlies got for Desmond Bane, I suspect they would have traded him, but they didn't. Orlando could have probably traded that stuff for Trae Young. They chose Desmond Bane, and the Knicks went through this last year, right? How could you trade 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges? Well, the Grizzlies offered 4 in the past. Other teams made similar offers. Guys that fit on any team and don't have discernible weaknesses are what teams are looking for, much more than guys like Trae, who have a lot of value in very narrow circumstances. But if your roster isn't absolutely perfectly set up for them, they kind of become more trouble than they're worth.
Yeah, I want to get back to this as it relates to Mikal Bridges. We'll do that a little bit later. But I do want to get to what is the Knicks' current most pressing issue, which is their coaching search. They do not have a coach right now. You know, we touched on the Tibbs thing, and, you know, we've talked about it plenty, but it is worth mentioning, and I think it deserves to be worth consistently mentioned that, you know, even from somebody like myself who was critical of Tibbs for many times throughout his tenure, I think it's unquestionable that he did a very good job to borderline great job in New York. I don't think that they get to where they are today if he doesn't help kind of establish that foundation, especially early on his first year. I mean, that team was, you know, God knows how they went 41-31. But, you know, I think like this is just the nature of the league. Sometimes you need a new voice. Sometimes that's just how it works. I mean, Mike Malone won a championship. He's out of a job less than 2 years later. It's a tough business, and when you make these moves to bring in the talent, and you're kind of like, again, you're pot committed to this talent. If it's not gelling, if it's not together, you have two options, right? Are we going to try and overturn this roster again, or do we trust our talent identification, our roster building of like, hey, we think these pieces make sense. We believe that there's more to get out of this group. And therefore, if the coach is not able to do it and he can't get them to gel, and maybe he's not connecting with them in the way that he has in the past, that's the move we have to make. I don't know. Did you feel, because there was a lot of sentiment, obviously, after he gets, his walking papers of like, they got to the Eastern Conference Finals. They haven't been there since '99. You've got to give it, or since 2000. Sorry, you have to give him another chance because he's earned it. They beat Boston in the playoffs. What more can you ask of him? Or do you feel like, just looking at that decision, that no, actually, is it a risk? Are you putting your neck on the chopping block as the front office? Yeah, potentially. But is that, like, do you think that that's a risk worth taking in their position, or do you think that he did deserve to have another year on the job?
Nobody knows a team better than the people running a team. And I think once those people have decided that a change is necessary, short of a championship or the finals, like, you have to be willing to make the hard decisions, right? You can't let bad press deter you from doing what's right. What I suspect happened was they decided in March or February or something like that what they were doing wasn't working. They didn't think there was a change that made sense at the time. If there was a future head coach on their staff, they would have promoted them, but there wasn't. Is there even a former head coach on their staff? I don't think there was.
Mo Cheeks.
Oh, Mo Cheeks. But Mo Cheeks is not like, Mo Cheeks is not where you're like, you feel comfortable promoting him like that.
He's not even trying to get a head coaching job.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You don't have like one of those aspirational assistants on your staff. If Johnny Bryant was still on the staff, maybe you would have done it, because at least then you could have evaluated him. Like, I think part of why Memphis fired Taylor Jenkins was they wanted to evaluate Isalo under those tough circumstances, and they were seemingly happy with what they saw.
Yeah. Nuggets too.
Look at coaching in the NBA now. I think, and this sounds bad, but I just think we're moving more towards a model where there is a big difference between what I call point A to point B coaches and point B to point C coaches, right? I think the things that take a bad, downtrodden organization from the bottom to the middle or even close to the top are different things than those that take a team at the middle or close to the top over the top, right? Tibbs is great at building a culture. He's great at making his team accountable, at getting them to play hard on defense, doing the basic stuff, maximizing your regular season equity. Is he creative enough to match wits with Rick Carlisle in the playoffs? The answer is probably not. And if you're going to beat Rick Carlisle's team in the playoffs, you need a coach who can do that. Do I necessarily know that there's a candidate out there like that? No, but I know that that's not Tibbs, so I'm prepared to take that chance. My stance throughout this process has been, go talk to unconventional candidates. Go talk to first-timers. You don't have to get somebody with a name. You just want somebody with new and interesting ideas. Among the former head coaching set, like people with a name that, fans and listeners have heard of, I have advocated for James Borrego. James Borrego is not nearly as famous as, say, Michael Malone, who won a championship with Jokic. He coached the Hornets for, I believe, 4 or 5 years. They were like 500 that whole time. They have totally collapsed since he left. He's very creative offensively. He's very open-minded about lineups. He's the sort of like creative thinker that I think has the upside to like milk more out of this current roster, because it's not going to change that much. And then maybe we can see like what this team is really capable of. And if it turns out with a new coach it's not capable of competing for a title, then you consider the roster stuff later.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because I think that given the limitations of the roster, we didn't see what it could be, right? I think we didn't play 5 out, we didn't really see double big. I think both should be in the Knicks arsenal. You want to be able, I think winning 4 series, people have talked so much about how depth matters. Winning 4 series today, you need to win multiple ways, right? The Pacers are talked about for ball movement. They also pressure the ball. They also have counters. They also can rely on Halliburton as a scorer if they need to, right? Or Siakam as a scorer to get like the old fashioned quote unquote buckets. So I think they need to win multiple ways. Kind of taking a little bit of step back, I know this is a bit of a detour. There are people that say that the Knicks were just fundamentally flawed from how they created this team. Right? They didn't build through the draft the same way. They didn't tank at all. Randall had this great season. They kind of leaned into it and played into it. They got Brunson, but he's a flawed superstar or whatever. What would you respond to people who say like this rebuild for the Knicks was flawed from the beginning?
They didn't do it the way that I would have done it at the time. Like I was screaming at the time, like you got to tank, right? You got to get Randall out of there. You got to see what you have in Obi. But even though they didn't, I think they followed organically what was happening and they didn't force anything. And look, is Jalen Brunson flawed? Sure. You're also not paying him supermax money, right? You gave up no assets to get him. You signed him for free, and he has been below market his entire time in the league. Is OG Anunoby a perfect player? No, he doesn't really have that much on the ball. He's not somebody you think of at his salary. Like when you pay $40 million a year, you're thinking of like a 25-point scorer, and that's not OG. But OG has been a tremendous success, and they gave up. Like losing quickly is a loss, but I think they substantially improved by doing that. Every individual move that they've taken, with maybe a few small exceptions, has generally worked out. And even if they didn't take the path that I was thinking I would have taken for them 5 years ago, they got within 6 wins of the title, right? I am totally open to the idea that this roster is flawed. Guess what? Like everybody who thinks we're just going to do it the way Oklahoma City did it, there's only one Oklahoma City, right? I'm not against tanking. I am very pro tanking. I also think you have to be realistic about what tanking means. You might do it for 5 years and get 2 stars. You might do it for 5 years and get none. I think they probably just looked at this and thought originally our plan was to tank, but we saw an opportunity. Something happened organically that we weren't expecting. So we rolled with it, right? And if it hadn't worked, if they'd brought in Brunson and it had gone badly and he wasn't, he wasn't capable of being this star, if he was actually, oh no, he was just Luka's sidekick all along, blah, 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 I think they would have pivoted and they would have figured it out. I think I trust this front office enough, given how well each of these individual moves have gone, that I'm willing to say, even if it's not what I would have done, they deserve credit for doing it, right? Getting within 6 wins of the finals is not easy. Think of the teams that haven't done that in decades, right? The Clippers have done that once in their entire existence, right? How many times have the Kings done that? How many times has New Orleans done that? They got really, really far, and even if there are flaws along the way, I just think they've earned the benefit of the doubt.
The point you made about their process and they let things happen organically. I have an entire theory about this that I've developed over the last decade about how Dolan allows new front offices to operate. And basically it is that he gives them one tank. They get one tank year. You get one tank year. You can use it whenever you want to use it, but you get one tank year, and then the rest of the time is you have to try to be good. And so I think they initially wanted to tank that first year. If you look at everything they did, they basically just signed a bunch of $3 million, $4 million, $5 million 1-year contracts in free agency. They walked into the season with I think 17 or 18 million of cap space that they still
used
had
a lottery pick on a guy who was playing behind their
right. Yeah, I think it was very obvious that they were not committed to Julius Randle, and then all of a sudden it's I guess we're good, so we have to roll with this, and then it's once you show that progress, it's all right, well, to get bad now we would have to we have to move off of pieces, and it's not as easy as there's also market pressures. James Dolan was on the pod with Brunson and Hart this year, and he more or less confirmed my theory where he was we will never intentionally lose basketball games. People pay too much money to do that. He's just not going to do it. And I would prefer an owner who is a little bit more flexible on that for sure. I think you're seeing some of the value of being flexible on that with a team like Houston, where Tillman Fertitta initially was on his Matt Ishbia shit. And then he was okay, you know what? We can suck for a few years. That's fine. But the job you have, if you're Leon Rose, you can, try to convince James Dolan of something, but if he wants it a certain way, that's the job you signed up for. You knew what James Dolan was and what he wanted and his expectations, presumably, before you got the job. So you have to operate under those parameters to an extent. And I just think that, like, given that, I'm like, is it conventional what they did? No. Is it what I personally would have, like, probably settled on doing? No. But, look, they clearly believed in Brunson at a level beyond what most people did. I think even given that, he has exceeded that belief. Like, there's no question he's exceeded what they thought he was. And then he's done them a huge favor in, like you mentioned, signing that extension last offseason was a huge benefit to them. It gave them a lot more flexibility to operate. And they are where they are. Like, you can have, I think the main takeaway I really took away from this playoffs, the main takeaway I took away from the playoffs is that, like, going into the season, I think even forget the season, going into the playoffs, I think most people had come around to the idea of, like, okay, the Pacers are not just like this fluky team that, because of injuries got to where they did last year, and they've developed since that point. They're a legitimately good team. But I think the consensus going into that Cleveland series was like, this is a bad matchup for them. Cleveland's going to wipe them out, blah, blah, blah. And even going into the finals, it's like, okay, well, this was a nice run, but OKC is it's a bridge too far. And it's like, to me, my takeaway is, if you're a certain baseline of good, at that point, the way the NBA postseason works now, and just how fine the margins are, like, you can, if you have a coach that's willing to tinker, willing to just push margins in certain ways and experiment and try different things and be versatile, not just in terms of lineups, but tactically, you give yourself a chance. And
probably no coincidence the Pacers have a coach who had one of the biggest upsets in the finals.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, I think, I look at this roster and I 100% agree that there's, like, it could definitely use another guy that can, get into the paint and draw two to the ball and allow Brunson to play off ball. Yes, they could use, it would be nice if Karl-Anthony Towns would, like, play defense all the time. Like, there are all these things you can point to and be like, well, they don't have that thing, they don't have this thing. But they won 51 games, while I think most people that are objectively looking at it would say that they were not being optimized by their coach in a lot of ways. And you got to a conference finals despite what I would say was riding some real good fortune against Boston and Detroit to an extent. And when you reach that level, it's like, okay, well, if we think that this talent didn't got there in spite of, the way they were being deployed, then maybe getting a coach that we think is more aligned with how we want to use this group, we can get to a level of winning a championship. And ultimately, whatever path you take to get, like, that's kind of where you want to end up, no matter what path you take. And so, maybe they took the load less traveled, but, so did the Pacers in a lot of ways, right?
Throw something to you guys. Just I'm going somewhere with this, but hear me out. Would you rather be, like, as far as roster situation and assets go, would you rather be where the Knicks are, or would you rather be where the Utah Jazz are?
The Knicks.
Right? Yeah. Stacey, you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. The reason I bring this up is that we talked about, like, the organic build of Randall being good. I think Utah was kind of the opposite, right? Where they trade Mitchell and Gobert, they load up on picks, and they probably expect to tank right away. Lauri Markkanen kind of did what Julius Randle did, right?
Yeah.
Literally wins most improved player. All of a sudden, like, oh, wow, we're competitive. We have all these accidental veterans that were matching salary in the Gobert and the Mitchell trades. Well, what did they do? At both of their trade deadlines in the next 2 years, they kneecapped themselves and they forced themselves to tank. Then they had another intentionally bad season this year. They wound up picking fifth. Like, look, I'm not going to sit here and say the Jazz are in a bad place. They're not. They have a lot of assets. They're going to pick number 5 this year. They're going to pick high next year. Like, the Jazz are in a good place. And if the Knicks were where the Jazz were and they had the added advantage of being in New York with all those assets, they might be in an even more promising place. But what I'm trying to get at is the Jazz did just waste 3 years getting there. They did just handicap something like that was promising on paper before, like, to get to where they are now. I'm not saying that's a bad place necessarily. I am saying it's kind of aimless and you don't know like how exactly you're going to get out of it. So I would just say to any fans who really wanted them to tank and then Randall kind of prevented that, it's not as simple as just becoming the Thunder. You might become the Jazz instead.
So to get back to the coaching search for a second, you mentioned James Borrego. I think a creative offensive mind is for sure a profile of coach that I think a lot of Knicks fans would like. The two that they've at least been reportedly most linked to, I guess three. One is currently under contract with the Dallas Mavericks, Jason Kidd, and the other two are
pretending that's the case.
Yeah,
like
right. Yeah,
every assistant on that team isn't jumping off that ship right now.
Yeah, no. Look. I just want to. I'll get through. So Taylor Jenkins is the other one, and Mike Brown's the other one. To go back to the Kid thing. Okay, so I'm sure anybody that's listening to this is a basketball sicko, so I'm sure they already know. But anyway, Sean Sweeney, his top assistant, leaves yesterday for. Is that basically a lateral move that he took to go to?
I think he got a better title. I don't think he had the associate title in Dallas, but like he's a front of bench assistant to front of bench assistant. Like he gets the fancy title. And I think the fancy title matters to these guys because that's how you get head coaching interviews. So like,
it's the Johnny Bryant situation again, right?
Yeah, it's the Johnny Bryant situation. Exactly. Like, I think it matters a little bit. I don't know what the money is, but like, I think really what happened is we got some reporting that they made the finals last year and they didn't extend their staff. And it's just like, that's pretty unusual, right? Like, usually you make the finals, you're thrilled. I'm surprised they didn't extend Kidd then and there, let alone his assistants who were making a lot less. And like, man, you got to be pretty happy with them if you made the finals. But they traded
Luke. Usually you make the finals and you don't trade your 25-year-old.
Fair point.
Superstar. Yeah, you know what the problem with this finals team is? Our best player. So I don't know. The Kid thing is really weird to me because I'm like, they're denying that they will let him out of his contract. But you're right. It's like, okay, well, if you're not letting him out of his contract, then why? Like, I could maybe understand you didn't have an impetus to extend those guys previously. But if you're also now saying, hey, Jason Kidd's staying here, but then you're letting his assistants walk. And by the way, it's not just Sweeney. Sweeney's out, he's gone. But Jared Dudley apparently is a guy who's being courted by other teams as well.
Go get him as an assistant, by the way. Have you guys ever met Jared? Jared is the best human being in the NBA. I'm going to tell my Jared Dudley story. Clear the way for me here. First time I met Jared Dudley, it was in the Laker locker room at MSG. So for those of you who don't know how it works when you're a reporter and you're in the locker room pregame, everyone, like, not everybody's there, but most of the players are hanging around. You can kind of just go up and talk to them. There's a literal line. Like it's the Godfather. It's the morning of his daughter's wedding. And you're going up to ask Brando for a favor because every reporter there knows that Jared Dudley is going to give him a great quote. I was in line. I was last on the line. I'm asking about Alex Caruso. I'm writing a story about him and just like, you know what, because that was his breakout season. So he's telling me the story of how Caruso, like how they found out how athletic he was. He says they were at practice out of nowhere. Caruso throws down like the biggest dunk he's ever seen. So I'm walking out to the court with Dudley as he says this. He looks me dead in the eye and he goes, yeah, turns out white men can jump. Then he pats me on the shoulder and walks away. What a legend of a human being. I would love it if he were on the Knicks bench. Pay him a lot of money. Jared Dudley's going to be a head coach someday. I love that guy.
It certainly seems that way. But it's, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'll just ask you, like, I don't know if you've heard anything about the Kid situation, but like, it just doesn't, none of it adds up to we're actually in love with our coach.
No, it's something is going on there. Like something is rotten in Denmark. I don't know what it is. And like, I think it's a sort of situation where do you even want a coach who doesn't want to be there? Right. Especially given all of the acrimony after the Luka trade, you get this fresh start with Cooper Flagg. And it's like, is this really the way you want to do it? And like, also say you don't extend him. You're probably not bringing him back at the end of the year and you're just doing a coaching search then. Do you want Cooper Flagg to have 2 head coaches in his first 2 years and like maybe 2 general managers? I'm just saying. We don't know if Nico is necessarily long for this world. I'm just like, don't you want more stability? I don't know. Like either you bring your coaches back and you like show stability to the world and you say like, yes, we made a controversial decision, but we are standing by it. We love our team. That is not the message that they're putting out right now. If Kidd wants to leave, like you need to address the core problems in the building. What you really need to do is fire Nico. How hard is that? He traded Luka Doncic. This is, I don't know, man. Like, I don't think that there's really much sense in that organization right now. I don't know what they're really aiming to do, but like, if coaches are fleeing your ship like this, like they're just running away, that might be a red flag to you that like something is going on that you really need to address.
Well, especially when you land Cooper Flagg, who is like, look, I don't watch any college basketball at all, but is basically viewed as a generational prospect. So like, or at least close to that level. Like, this is a job in theory, even with the picks out the door and even with all of the Luka Doncic shit and everything. I look at that roster and I'm like, is it perfect? No, I think they got a lot of talent. I think Cooper Flagg is, if he's as good as people say, they're a team that can make noise as soon as next season. Like, I don't think that's out of the question, even with Kyrie being injured and everything. Like, that's a talented roster. And so, like, you would think this is like, we're on board with this. But yeah, to your point, assistants are leaving. Jason Kidd also, and again, like you mentioned this, right? Kidd having problems potentially with Nico Harrison. I would assume maybe he does. Whatever. Let's just say that's the case. We know Jason Kidd's past. We know that everything is a power play for Jason Kidd. Everything is a power play for him. Like, do I think that a part of him would like to leave Dallas and coach the Knicks? Yeah, I do. I 100% buy that. I don't think that's bullshit. I think, they had reported interest in him going back to their first coaching search when they ended up hiring Tibbs. Like, I don't think that's a joke, right? Like, we know Jalen Brunson he's talked glowingly about Jason Kidd. And whatever his off the court issues, which are plentiful, Jason Kidd has, to me, proven himself and he's improved over time as a head coach. And I do think that he's like a very, in terms of tinkering, like he's very willing to tinker. And I think there's a value to that. So I get the appeal for the Knicks, and I get the appeal that the Knicks may have for Jason Kidd. What I also know about Jason Kidd, like, again, he's about power plays. If he wants Nico out, he might be like, talking to the Adelsons behind closed doors and like, hey, if Nico's going to be here, I don't think this can work. But, if I had more power over personnel or whatever, like, this is what he does. So I truly don't know, but I don't think the Mavericks know for sure. I don't think the Knicks know for sure. I think the only person that actually knows what Jason Kidd's end goal here is, other than getting a pay raise, which everybody knows he wants, is Jason Kidd. I don't think anybody else actually knows what he wants.
I'm trying to figure out if there's a figurehead GM out there that he could install. I guess Rod Thorne is probably, I don't even know if Rob Thorne is around. Like, I'm trying to think of GMs that he knows from the past where, like, he could say, oh, no, he's the president of basketball operations. But
Pelinka.
Like, maybe Pelinka. Yeah, there we go. Who is his Pelinka? Oh, Jeff Schwartz is his agent, right?
Yeah.
Hire Jeff Schwartz as the president of the Mavericks. Yeah, I'm trying to think because it's obviously in play. And my thing, if I'm Nico and I'm like at all worried about my job security, isn't there kind of a part of you that wants to like maybe let Kidd go and hire a less dangerous coach?
Well, I mean, look, the guy traded Luka because he basically was like, if you kind of read between the lines, read the tea leaves of it, it's basically like Luka was not my guy. That's like mostly what it is. It's like Luka's not my guy, Kyrie's my guy, AD's my guy, like PJ Washington's one of his guys. Like everybody that he brings in is like one of his guys. So, Kidd, he hired Jason Kidd, right? Nico hired
no,
Jason
he
Kidd.
got hired before him. They were the same offseason. As I recall, this was the process. There was after Carlisle got he
mutually
left.
parted ways.
Yeah, as that was going on, there was all of that reporting about Donnie Nelson and about Haralabob. As I recall, there was like I think they called it like a leadership council or something, where it was Cuban and Michael Finley and Dirk and a few other people were involved. They had kind of huddled up and decided on the coach. And as Carlisle left, he endorsed Jason Kidd as his replacement. So they hired Jason Kidd. I think the other candidate was Jamal Mosley, who was an assistant there, was close with Luka, ends up in the Magic job. So they hire Kidd as a group. And then I think they hire Nico on top of that. And like my personal opinion, I don't know if this is really the case, was that even though he was given the GM title, a Mark Cuban GM and a normal GM are very different things. I think they hired Nico with the idea that he was going to help them on these recruiting fronts, which, to be fair, he did. but that was sort of the idea, right? He was going to fill a role in that front office that weren't, that didn't have occupied, but final decision power was going to be Cuban's because it was always Cuban's. Then Cuban sells the team, and I don't know that the Adelsons and Dumont maybe understood what Nico's skill set was, and they just looked at him and said, like, well, he's the GM, and the GM makes the basketball decision, so we're going to trust him over any other human being on the planet, apparently. So that's what I think was the case. I don't know that for sure, but yeah, I think the process there was a little odd. If I were Nico, I would be pretty interested in bringing in my own coach. I don't know who that would be.
And we don't know if he has the agency to do that either right now.
Well, also, I'm trying to wonder, like, when he was at Nike, I wonder what player clients of his that he knew that have since gone into coaching. Like, maybe that would be the answer. But yeah, I don't know. But there'd also been the rumors that they might hire a senior executive, put above him or work with him or whatever. That I don't know if that is materialized yet. I don't think they've hired anybody, but that situation is a mess. And like, I don't know how as an owner you look at this and say everything's fine. Something is off there, and you've got to do something about it.
As far as Jason Kidd, the actual coach, just talk a little bit about all these guys. I mean, what would you think about Jason Kidd, now coming into New York and being the head coach? Like, what have you seen from him, I guess, in his time in Dallas? Good and bad.
I mean, there is good and there is bad, right? Like the good, I think he is a good defensive coach, and he's a good like game to game adjuster on like the smaller things where you see his teams tend to get stronger defensively as the series progresses. I do feel pretty good about that. He plays like he's comfortable playing multiple, like a lot of guys. He's comfortable experimenting with lineups. The downside is I don't think he's an especially interesting offensive coach. And like he's had pretty considerable offensive talent, right? He has Giannis in Milwaukee. That offense is never good. It gets as high as like average at the end. Budenholzer takes over and like, boom, off to the races. Then he has Luka and Brunson. The last year
and
before
KP too, right?
What?
And Porzingis too, right? At that time.
I
Right?
did have Porzingis at one point too. Yeah, where I don't know if it was the year before he took over or 2 years before, but under Carlisle 1 year, they had the greatest offense in NBA history by efficiency to that point. With Luka and Brunson and some Porzingis, they were never in the top 5, and you watch them, and it's a lot of like dribble, shoot, dribble, pass, dribble, shoot. Not super creative, a lot like what the Knicks have had with Brunson these last few years. I don't know if that's just because he had Luka, and that's the way you play with Luka, and to a lesser extent Brunson, or if he's just not an especially creative offensive thinker. And then the other thing about this is like Jason Kidd's kind of a prickly dude. He maybe like players do tend to really love him. Brunson has had nothing but positive things to say. Giannis loves him, like really, and has offered to go to bat for him when he got fired. Like Giannis really, really loved Kidd. I think star players really did love Kidd.
Well, LeBron has talked about, LeBron. LeBron loved him going back to Team USA, and then he talked about him in LA.
LeBron, like, he's a basketball genius, like legitimately, truly. His personality can be a little bit abrasive, I think, based on some of the reporting. I don't know him personally. Like, I think that's the sort of person also where you talk about something the Knicks have mostly had, maybe not as far as on-court decisions, but as far as personalities go, there's been synergy, right? Like Tibbs was part of the family. He was a CAA guy. Leon, he'd known forever. Having that, I think, helps you build a culture organizationally. If you're bringing in Kidd from the outside, you don't know how well he would collaborate with the front office, right? That's a question. You don't know like how much he'd get along with every player on the roster, right? That's something you'd have to figure out. So I think there are pros and there are cons. He's not my first choice, but like he's made the NBA Finals as a coach, so like
and a conference finals.
Done that.
Yeah, and a conference finals another year, right? So there's that. I more or less kind of like I think he's improved over his time as a coach. He would not be the guy that I'd be like, this is who I want to replace.
I'm not giving up picks for him. Let's put it that way. Like there will be no swaps in that. Like he is out. You let him out of his contract, or thanks but no thanks.
Well, look, if Jason Kidd wants out, let me tell you, he will make things miserable for everybody in that building. Yeah, he knows what he has to do. But yeah, I think he's improved over time as a coach. I do think the defensive stuff with him is really promising. Towards the end of his time in Milwaukee, his scheme got exposed. He's cleaned up a lot of that stuff in Dallas. just with being more willing to try different things. Offensively, I again agree. Like it's a lot of like, I have awesome players, let them be awesome. This is like, this is like the basketball genius side of him where he's probably like, why didn't you just see that pass? And like, what pass? Like, what are you talking about? What? There's no pass there. He's like, you didn't see the guy running 3/4 down the court on the opposite side? Like, come on, just throw it over there. So I think there's always a little drawback or a bit of a drawback with him offensively. I don't know. Taylor Jenkins, he obviously had a weird departure from Memphis, given the total circumstances there. I don't know if you have any. I'm going to be like, of the three candidates, he's the one I have the least knowledge of. I did not watch a lot of Memphis over the last few years. Seems to be well regarded as a defensive mind. He's 40 years old, extremely young coach. I don't know. Like, do you have real thoughts on Jenkins, or I mean, and do you think that he would be able to handle New York? Because I think, look, it's the biggest or second biggest market brand, whatever you want to say, in the league. The media focus is intense. And look, I don't personally think this is a massive deal, but it's worth bringing up. Leon Rose, no front office exec, talks to the media, so you're effectively the voice of the organization in a lot of ways. Do you think that's something that like he would be up for?
I mean, I think he's a good coach. I don't think he's like someone I would get really, really excited about. But like back-to-back 2 seeds in Memphis is not nothing, right? And they had a lot of injuries in those years. You kind of have to coach a team where it's like we have one playing style when Ja's healthy and we have one playing style when he's not. And to be able to juggle that stuff, that's interesting to me. That's pretty significant. I'm curious about this. This is just something that I noted. They hire a bunch of new assistants last year. Like basically the front office brings them in, like changes a lot of Taylor's staff. One of the assistants was a former D3 coach named Noah LaRoche, who installs an offense that's really unlike anything we've ever seen in the NBA, right? There's very little pick and roll. It's a ton of driving. It's a ton of moving into spots like they're vacated by the last guy. It's a very, very complicated offense, but it did very well for a lot of this year. I'd recommend Thinking Basketball did a very interesting video on it. I'd recommend giving them a watch. When he got fired, Noah LaRoche got fired as well. Now, I don't think you can run that specific offense with this personnel because Jalen Brunson is so pick and roll heavy. And ideally, you have 5-out spacing. You run a lot of Cat Brunson pick and roll. That being said, I like the idea of like a head coach that is willing to work with people that maybe he didn't hire or doesn't know as well, if they have interesting ideas, right? Like even if he didn't hire Noah LaRoche, like he did have him in the building and he accepted his ideas and he worked with them. That's a trait that I think serves a head coach well, right? You go back to the Warriors and Steve Kerr taking, I can't remember what his name was. I think it's Nick Uren, who had the idea to start Andre Iguodala in the finals over Andrew Bogut, and he credits him. Like, I like a head coach with a little bit of humility who's not going to say, like, my way or the highway, who's going to listen to the people around him and try interesting ideas. That's something that does appeal to me about Taylor Jenkins. So I think I'd be okay with him as a hire. I think he's a good coach. Is he somebody that I would be thrilled with? Like, I don't, he's not Rick Carlisle, but like, he's good. I'd be happy with him.
Stacy?
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting what he accomplished. I think, there's something to be said about when a coach gets, if you want to say he was forced on him, right? Just being able to collaborate. I do think that's something that Knicks fans want, is a coach who will listen to the assistants a little bit more. There were the roster is completely different, so I don't know if you can draw an A to B, but Johnny Bryant leaves, goes to Cleveland, where their offense experienced a revolution, really. Obviously, Atkinson had a lot to do with that as well, but everywhere Johnny Bryant has been, he's succeeded, and it seemed like he was able to have Tibbs' ear in maybe a way that the other assistants haven't. I think just being able to make defensive adjustments, and for all the talk about offense with Tibbs, we played drop the whole season, which is not Cat's forte, to say the least. They went to switching. It somehow worked against Boston. Didn't work as well against Indiana.
Well, it worked because Boston missed the shots.
Yeah, and I also think that Indiana was better equipped to beat those switches as well, right? It's not even against Oklahoma City, which is a much more talented team than the Knicks. It worked, but that's a fair point as well. But the point is, like, it seemed like despite not playing this, the Knicks players actually did a reasonably good job of adapting to a completely new scheme that they hadn't played really all year. They played it, I think, the last Boston game. I think they played it the last Cleveland game. So you definitely want a coach that listens to assistants. I do want to talk about the third guy a little bit more. Mike Brown, has obviously a lot of coaching experience, has been a part of some really great organizations. I think he's adapted. He's known as a defensive guy, but obviously in Sacramento, they had some really interesting offenses. What interests me about, I think with the Knicks, they traded Randall for Cat, and I think most would agree that Cat is a better player. But getting two to the ball, like when he drives, it is a shot. That's it, right? Randall, for all his flaws, was passing out of those and creating open threes.
Well, definitely at a higher level than Cat. No question about that.
Yeah, and a lot of those are turnovers or charges. And Cat is a good passer. I think early in the season they were going high post, and teams are still defending Josh Hart. So he's really, I think he is a talented passer, just not on the move. I'm curious. Like, this is what attracted me to Malone before it seems like that's not an issue, is that the Knicks are trying to win with a subpar defender at point guard and a subpar defender at center. There is one team that did that recently, right? And Malone coached them. Going back to Brown, though, Brown had to deal with some of that with Sabonis. He used Sabonis as a hub. I'm curious if you think, like, what part of that or any of Brown's career would be really translatable to this roster.
I think that was probably more about having Sabonis than it was about like offensive creativity. Right? And even their offense, like, it was number one the year they made the playoffs, and I think it was the most efficient of all time.
It was.
At that point. Now we were in that stretch where every year the number one offense was the most efficient of all time. I felt like the league kind of figured some of that stuff out over the next year or two, right? Their offense dipped a fair bit with mostly the same players. Some of that was, I think, Fox got a little bit worse because, like, he's so dependent on speed that as he ages, even slight declines are pretty significant. I think a lot of that was about Sabonis. I will say the thing I like about Mike Brown is that he has never even once had a normal job, right? Like, he had LeBron, which is a whole hornet's nest. He had the Lakers with Kobe, which I think he got fired.
You're Phil Jackson.
Yeah, like, that's a pretty unconventional job. I'm trying to think. He goes back to Cleveland, so my apologies. He did briefly have a normal job, but then he got fired and LeBron came back. And then Sacramento, he has the Vivek madness where he's coach of the year and he's fired 18 months later, whatever it is. So I think he's somebody that's going to be pretty well equipped to handling with this, like, the specific intricacies of the New York job. But he's not going to get unsettled by the media. He's used to the pressure. Like, there's no questions about that because that's all he's ever known as a head coach. I mostly think he's kind of just another flavor of Tibbs, right? Where he's an older school coach who, emphasizes defense. And to be fair, I think he's one of the best defensive floor raising coaches in basketball. But of course, so is Tibbs. I am open-minded about his offense, but I think more of that is just that Sabonis and Towns are very different players. And I don't know that you're going to run similar stuff for Towns. Now, I think you brought up a good point, which is Towns is a very good stationary passer, but once he starts driving, he gets tunnel vision, and that tunnel vision leads to A, bad shots, but B, more importantly, a lot of turnovers. I think that's something you have to coach out of him, or you have to find a way, like, within your offensive design to become a little bit less predictable, to maybe, like, can you find ways to get cutters coming to easier parts of the floor so that Towns is making simpler passes when he's on the move. I think there are small things that you do want to take away from what Sacramento did, because if your center is going to have the ball as much as the Knicks' will, because Towns, like, he's not Sabonis, but he's going to have the ball a lot, you do want to find ways to make his life easier as a passer. I just don't know that it was Brown doing that schematically so much as that being who Sabonis is as a player.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing with Brown too, I'm kind of just ambivalent about the coaching search because sometimes you think somebody's a great coach, they get hired, and then you're like, oh, this guy's an idiot. Sometimes you think guy's an idiot, and it's like, oh, he's a great coach. So the proof will be in the pudding. But the thing I do like about Brown, and you mentioned the offensive drop off. I think the main offensive drop off, one, I think I thought he was really let down by the front office there. Honestly, same thing with Taylor Jenkins. I think in a lot of ways, both those guys were let down by their front offices. He comes in the first year, they win whatever it was, 49 games, like the beam, everything is fun. They play competitive first round series against Golden State. They lose in game 7 at home. They do nothing that offseason. They basically they create cap space. They dump a first round pick to create cap space. They extend Harrison Barnes. They renegotiate and extend Sabonis at that point. They just did nothing. And they extended Trey Lyles too. Like, whoop-de-doo, great. So that was their offseason. And then the following offseason, so I think they still won 46 games the next year. The Western Conference was just a tough conference.
Just dropped. It was 2 losses. They lost 2 more games, but they fell 6 seeds, something like that. Yeah.
And Memphis just experienced that this year too. Yeah. So they lose in the play-in. And then their big move this offseason is to get DeRozan. And it's like, well, you're running this speedball offense. How the hell do you think DeRozan fits in? He's not a good off-ball player either. So now you have him and Fox, neither of whom is a good off-ball player, neither of whom is a particularly willing three-point shooter. And it's just a lot to manage. They never addressed their wing situation. They never strengthened the front court behind Sabonis. And then the big one for me, and I think this speaks to some of Mike Brown's limitations as an offensive coach, but also something that if you're the Knicks and you're thinking about, they've kind of signaled we want a coach who is aligned with us organizationally, which to me speaks to we want a collaborative process. We want to have input in coaching staff, that we want to share input there with you. And Jordi Fernandez, who basically was like the offensive coordinator for him, he goes to Brooklyn. He gets hired as the head coach there. And he's also the Team Canada head coach as well. And, for whatever Brooklyn did this year with their I think they got as much as you possibly could out of their talent. I thought the offensive stuff they ran was pretty creative. And then more importantly, you saw the slippage in Sacramento's offense. And I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, he is kind of an old school coach, and this is different from Tibbs. When Tibbs's teams have been good offensively, they're still very good in like a very
caveman way. They get offensive rebounds. That's it.
Right. Yeah, it's like they get offensive rebounds, or they have great shot making, and they limit their turnovers. It is not like we're gonna run around at 500 miles an hour and get out in transition and all these type of things. And I think the fact that he was willing to do that with that Sacramento team, and also just willing to do stuff that Tibbs would never do, right? In terms of like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to play Trey Lyles at the 5 against Golden State in a playoff game, and like things of that nature. He is interesting to me, and I appreciate the point you brought up about like he's been in these crazy kind of like you're in the fishbowl kind of situations, and he loves the media, man. He loves
He's a good dude. He's fun at a conference.
He loves talking to the press and giving quotes and whatever. And I think that's appealing. I think it's, again, like I think both him and Jenkins and Kidd, all of them, and it's interesting, right? So these are 3 coaches who I think we would all agree their strengths lie on the defensive side of the basketball. I find it interesting that now today, your boy, the guy you mentioned, James Borrego, is, he gets his name floated out there as like somebody the Knicks are interested in. I think there might be a resolution coming here quite soon on who the head coach is, and it would not surprise me if James Borrego is then made the associate head coach or whatever and is put in charge of the offense. That's what it feels like to me is the situation. And I echo your sentiments about James Borrego. He's somebody, going back to his time in Charlotte, I thought his offenses were quite impressive given the talent he had at his disposal, and similar to kind of like what the Kings had going, where it was just crazy speedball stuff. Charlotte, they played fast. They got out in transition quite a bit. Obviously, that leaned into the strengths of LaMelo Ball, maybe to LaMelo's detriment. But I think all of them present their own strengths and weaknesses, but predominantly all of them seem to be defensive minded, which maybe is the tell of like they're going to maybe pick one of these 3 and then give them an offensive coach that they really want and trust to kind of like coach up that side of the basketball.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you bring up Jordy Fernandez is important. Michael Malone was the head coach in Denver with Jokic, but I know Chris Finch got a lot of credit early on for helping develop the Jokic offense, and then David Adelman as well. I think this is something that's important to keep in mind with any coach is a coach alone is not doing everything. He has a whole staff for a reason. Getting those hires right matters. If you can get Borrego as an assistant, you should 100% do it. And you should be outbidding the Pelicans 100 times over to do it. Because, like, Pelicans are preposterously cheap historically. Like, go and steal him away. They can't afford a top assistant. I remember the Lakers search that ended with Frank Vogel. Vogel interviewed a lot, but there was a lot of similar buzz where it was like, Ty Lue is going to be the head coach. Frank Vogel is going to be the associate head coach. He's going to run the defense. And that's going to be his launching pad into another head coaching job. It could be similar for Borrego, right? Where somebody else is the head coach and deals with a lot of the media, the defense, the overall CEO type stuff. And Borrego just designs an offense that does well, and that gets him a head coaching job. So I do think that does make some sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's what they tried, I think, with Tibbs and Bryant, right? Bryant, I think, also brings the player development thing, right? And the Knicks, where they had RJ was still there. They had Mitchell Robinson, who was still very raw, but he was kind of their core young player, and they drafted quickly. So, I think that wouldn't surprise me as a formula. They got the defensive head coach and then the player development guy. I am curious, is there a formula for because I think in football, for example, it's much more well-defined, right? You have the head coach and you have the coordinators, and the coordinators kind of own each side. I just watched a team win the Super Bowl where their coach was on the hot seat. He had 2 coordinators forced on him on defense and offense, very respected guys. And it was like, well, what do you do here, right? But that worked, right? That he, I think it's a little bit more opaque in basketball. Do you think there is kind of a formula, or is the generalist head coach the best, or kind of these division of responsibilities? Like, what have you taken in terms of best practices in terms of that?
It's going to vary so much team to team because every head coach is different, and what he's going to need out of his staff is going to be different. And every head coach's personality is different, right? I think a really big thing that Johnny Bryant did, it's not just player development. The players love him, right? Wherever he's been, all of his players have really, really responded to him. Sometimes you need that personality in a top assistant because your head coach is the old school tough type, right? Every staff is going to be different. And I there are teams that I don't think use the coordinator terminology or that philosophy where it's a little bit more holistic. Whereas there are other teams where it's I think of Steve Kerr's first staff in Golden State, where it's Alvin Gentry, offense is yours. Ron Adams, defense is yours. Steve, you're the vision guy, right? Every staff is going to be very different. And my whole thing is what's most important to me is, number one, you're adaptable, and number two, you're collaborative. If you're those two things, I think you're probably going to end up in a pretty good place.
Yeah, I think that's good point there. I wanted to get to the extensions. The Knicks have a couple extensions facing them. They technically have 3. We can do, let's get the one that definitely shouldn't happen this offseason out of the way first, which is Karl-Anthony Towns. He has the potential to extend for up to 3 or 4 years, depending on if he opts in or opted out of the player option. I think it's safe to say that as much as I, surprisingly, to my own surprise, I enjoyed the Karl-Anthony Towns experience at times in New York, I think it would be insane for them to extend him. And I think they did not trade for him with within the framework of their entire cap situation to extend him after 1 year. I mean, if either of you feel that they should extend him, please feel free to share that sentiment now. But I strongly would advise Brock Aller, who definitely doesn't need my advice, to not engage in such discussions with Karl-Anthony Towns.
Maybe if they'd won the championship, but even then, I don't even think you should. The way their books are set up is they need Towns to come off of the books in 3 years so they can get back below the second apron at that point. So, yeah, no way.
Stacy, you have do you desperately want to extend Karl-Anthony Towns right now?
He's going to be 33, so no.
I mean, legitimately, the only reason you could even do this is if he would decline the player option and then extend at a much lower price. But I don't know why he would. I don't think he would do that. It doesn't make sense for him to do that. Why? Yeah, like why would you turn down a $60 million player option 2 years in advance? Not happening. Okay, good. Happy we had this conversation about Karl Anthony Towns. Okay, moving on to the more interesting one. I think the first one is obviously the most interesting. Mikal Bridges, you trade out a boatload of picks for him. Seemingly did not have the most fun of his career playing for Tom Thibodeau, who is now also interestingly out of the picture. I will just mention this because I do think it's worth mentioning. Mikal Bridges is represented by Jeff Schwartz, who you mentioned earlier, Sam, is the same agent as Jason Kidd. He is eligible for a 4-year, correct me if I'm wrong, $156 million extension this offseason. This is an interesting one because 2026 summer, there should be a line of teams that have cap space. So this will be one. This will not be this offseason where nobody has cap space other than Brooklyn. It'll be a lot of teams that have cap space. Mikal Bridges, I understand and I totally get why there are many Knicks fans that are down on Mikal Bridges after this past season. I get it. I think that people would be surprised probably by how teams in the league still view him and value him. Maybe not in terms of sending out an equal package of picks. Definitely not in terms of sending out an equal package of picks, but just in terms of we would love to have that guy in our roster. And that could be why he would decline, or opt not to extend this offseason and go into free agency. I suspect, and Sam, you touched on this on a pod that you did with Yossi Goslin, the Third Apron. So if you haven't checked that out. That maybe this has already been decided.
Yeah, I suspect that this was something they talked about when they made the trade, right? It's ironic, right? Because I think a year ago, we would have thought, oh, Mikal re-signing at 4 for 156. That's this massive bargain. He's doing us a favor like Brunson is because he's not waiting until free agency in 2026 when he can get the max. Now I don't think the max is really in play for him. I do think 4 for 156, maybe a little too much, and I'd love it if he'd take a little bit of a haircut. The real benefit to Bridges is that he never misses games, like literally ever. So just having like a plus starting wing, even if it's a little bit of an overpay that you never have to worry about getting hurt, is a pretty big advantage, right? Especially in the league now where you need so many wings if you're going to have any level of defensive versatility. I hope a more creative offensive coach can get him going a little bit. I think we saw when Brunson was hurt, he has a little bit more on-ball juice than Tibbs let him show. Clearly, it didn't work out that well between him and Tibbs if he's complaining about, how many minutes he's playing. I'm optimistic that he can be better offensively than he was this season. I'm more nervous about the defense because he wasn't what he was in Phoenix when he was in Brooklyn either. I wonder if that part of his game might just be gone. And so much of the theory, we've talked so much about this team having a bad point guard and a bad center on defense. You were supposed to make up for that by having 2 defensive stars on the wing. Right now they have 1. OG is still a defensive star. Bridges isn't. Again, I'd love it if he took a slight haircut here, but I think this is something they probably settled when they made the trade.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to get him the max. They don't want to. The Knicks have, or unless there's a trade that they would. But I think you're taking a hit there, and they are. I don't want to say they're pot committed given what they gave up, but that's a substantial. You're gonna have to take.
I think it's safe to say they're pot committed for given what they gave up.
Well, it's why when you heard about him and Durant talks, it's like they give up 5 first-round picks for him. They're not trading him for Durant.
Yeah,
they traded him a Giannis deal, but they're not trading him for Durant.
Has Bridges ever been traded for Durant before? That would be a full circle moment. I mean, I actually, I'll push back a little bit. I think his defense improved over the course of the season. I think we don't beat Boston without his defense on the wings. I think his flaws are, I would say, I don't know it's so much that he's not who he was in Phoenix, as he has very specific shortcomings that showed up big time on this team. Because when you play drop, you're asking, that's why Deuce fits so much better at the point of attack. Because the one thing he does extremely well is getting around screens. That is Bridges' biggest weakness. And teams with Cat there are saying, we're going to run you through 7,000 screens a game. I thought on the wing, he was fine. I thought kind of an ISO, he was fine. And I thought his off ball was good. I mean, the first 2 games are closed out by Mikal Bridges making defensive plays. So I think to me it is more the offense. This is a guy that's 6'7", you want him to have the ball a lot, is averse to the rim. He settles for a DeMar DeRozan shot diet without the rim pressure or the free throws. So he's a better 3-point shooter, but that also was a little bit worse this year, especially above the break. That to me is more concerning, where this is a guy who can get you 20. We haven't seen it amplify for others. Not the greatest passer. You could probably simplify his reads. You can do more creative things with Brunson off ball. We really don't leverage his off ball gravity. But I think just knowing how the Knicks operate, if it's a clear cut trade they can make, or I don't know, if Memphis really would look to blow it up, are you trading him for a guy like Jaren Jackson, or including him in a trade like that? Are you KD's off the table now? I don't think Giannis is moving, so that's out. I don't think you're trading him just for picks and role players, but maybe if there's a guy, maybe if you really like Herb Jones I don't think the Pelicans would do that, right? But I'm just throwing some names out there. Barring that, I would imagine if he wants the max, they'll give it to him. I don't know the specifics with the apron, and if there's ways to like shave some money off there that would work out, and he'd be willing to, given he's playing with his best friends. He's still going to be making a lot of money. I don't know, but I would imagine that they're going to resolve it one way or the other.
Yeah, this will get done. The next one I think is more interesting and more of a head scratcher, but like I don't know if the next one's getting done.
To go back to the Bridges thing, you talked about taking a haircut. I thought this was kind of interesting. I mean, I thought about it, but not actually kind of applied it in real understanding. But on a Hoop Collective today, it was yesterday, sorry, they were talking about how Raphael Stone last year had kind of like played a little hardball with Şengün. They got some money taken off the top on that deal, and that can benefit them down the line because in a second apron world, which is effectively a hard cap in a lot of ways, every dollar you save helps you kind of like gives you more flexibility. What number do you think for Bridges? Like you talked about him taking a haircut. What number do you think would be realistic for him to be like, okay, I'm doing you a little bit of a solid, but I'm still making enough here where it's like, yeah, this is fine.
So Anunoby is 40 a year, something like that. It's
yeah, he got 5 to 12 and a half.
Okay. So the extension would be 4 156 at the max. That's 39 a year. Could you do 4 for 140 at 35 a year? And you don't even have to structure like maybe you structure it so that it descends, so that makes it a little bit easier with other guys going up. Like something like that, I would feel a little bit better about, just as like for them, it's only going to be money, right? They're not going to be a second apron team this year. It's literally just going to be the next 2 years after that. The payroll is going to be enormous. Make it a little bit easier to like get that 15th roster spot filled, or like, I guess you probably can't extend McBride, at least not in his current state, because his salary is so low. And if you're going to bump him up, that creates other problems. But just make it a little bit easier to do whatever you're going to do around the fringes. I think that would be good, but I don't think it would be more than like 10, 15 million total, something in that range.
I wonder if they can get him at that number, and part of the kind of like trade-off is it's just a 3-year extension or it's a 4-year extension and the final is a player option. I wonder if that would be kind of the concession they make. That one's pretty interesting to me, though. I think I'm not that nervous about an extension getting done. I'm more just curious about what is the structure and what the number comes in at, because like you mentioned, I refuse to believe that you make a trade like that without some, knowledge in advance of like, hey, yeah, we're going to get this done one way or the other. Mitchell Robinson, though, I think this is way more interesting.
Yeah.
So Mitchell Robinson missed basically like 2/3 of the year. During this time, and he's missed a lot of time over the last couple of years. During this time, you're like, there's all this talk leading up to the deadline. It's like, all right, well, are they going to use this contract to get somebody else? What can they get? And then, they make the decision, they probably didn't have a market for him. And it's like, we're better off just playing him when he comes back, seeing what he can rehab his value to. And then he comes back, and I'm just going to, like, I think he moved better to me than he has moved and looked better than he has looked since 2021. He was that good. Like, he was moving out on switches on the perimeter defensively in a way that I haven't seen for years. And he retained being a just dominant offensive rebounder. And what I think really stands out with him is this is a guy now in 3 straight postseasons you have seen have a massive positive impact when he's on the floor. When you're in a title window, guys that move the needle in playoff minutes matter. They matter a lot. And, I think Isaiah Hartenstein's a hell of a player. We saw Isaiah Hartenstein struggle in ways defensively this season, and more importantly to me, against a common opponent in the Indiana Pacers in a way that I didn't think I've never seen Mitchell Robinson struggle that much. And I think that signals something about how he's able to translate his level to postseason basketball, even against quality opponents. And in my opinion, maybe the best offensive system in the league in Indiana. But the injuries are the injuries. I mean, that's just where it's at. And, what is his role on the team next year? Like, because if he's a starting center, he's probably going to want to get paid like a starting center. But what's a starting center, right? Because thank you to Ivica Zubac, we can always point to that contract and be like, well, Ivica makes $20 million a year. I can't give you more than Ivica. It's an interesting one. I tend to think they will probably end up paying him, but there's an argument to be made that like selling high is hard because this is when you would try to maybe sell high. I just don't know that selling high on him gets you anything, given that he has 1 year left on his contract. I don't know if that gets you anything that is worth trading him for. So I guess my question is, what do you think the number would even be at? And, do you shop him if you're the Knicks, at least hear out offers on him?
No, I just don't think you can feasibly do better, and you need the upside. That being said, like, I think the reason he was healthy at the end of the year is that he wasn't healthy at the beginning, right? Like, he started his season in March, so that's fewer opportunities to get hurt again for May. There's a big difference between a starting center in January and a starting center in June. Hartenstein was a big example of this. He really did struggle in the finals. The number, I think the max is 4 for 89. I wouldn't go 4 years for him, but as far as like that as an annual average, I think, like something in the 20-ish range feels about right to me. That's like, not quite good starting center money, but that accounts for his injuries. Like, I think if he could get that and guarantee himself some money, he'd probably be happy with that. Just because the reality for him is anytime he steps on the court, there is long-term injury risk. So I think if he can extend, he will. I don't think there's a trade out there that makes sense for him because, like, what, are you going to trade him for a point guard? I think that's less valuable to you, right? Are you going to trade him for a wing? I don't know. You're pretty invested in wing. Defensive center is the one thing you don't have. There aren't a lot of guys who can do everything that he does. My goal is keeping and extending him.
What would that number look like to you?
3 for 66, something like that. I don't know what the exact number would be. Whatever that max extension would be, I don't know what the exact formula is, but it's the same as the Austin Reeves number, I think. I think it's 4 for 89. I'm not giving him the 4 years, but I'll give him 3 at 20, like low 20s per year. I think that's
no options.
If you can you try for a team option because the Knicks do that a lot. Or you could maybe try, like maybe you get him to descend in salary like they do so often. Or you put on a partial guarantee. Like, you try, but I think if push comes to shove, I'm just comfortable with a flat 3 years. I think the way the cap is going, that's just not a very harmful contract.
Yeah, and I think the point you made about, like, look, he was healthy at the end of the year, and he's arguably the Knicks' most impactful player throughout the playoffs. He was super fucking good.
And that's not the first playoffs. He won arguably the most impactful player the last time they played Cleveland. This is not a new thing, right?
And he was great against Embiid last year too in that first round. So you have real evidence of this. But to your point, yeah, it's like, can you depend on this guy to get through seasons? And how do we get him through a season? Because I think what we learned is, yeah, we can talk about conditioning and he needs to get. I just don't know you want to push that guy more than 20 minutes, 22 minutes a night in the regular season, because you want to save him for the playoffs, because that's what matters. Like, that is what matters.
This is why I think if you're going to use the tax mid-level, it makes sense to use it on another center, just so you can really limit his minutes in the regular season. Make sure he never plays back-to-backs.
Do you think Al Horford is gettable?
maybe. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in teams in that range. Like, would he rather go to the Knicks or start for the Lakers? I don't know. Would he rather be a bench guy for the Knicks or go to the Warriors? I don't know. Like, there's going to be a lot of interest in that range. It's certainly worth the call, though.
New York does have a large Dominican population, so Al Horford should know that. Also,
another Dominican center.
Yes.
Like, did he ever overlap with Towns on the Dominican team?
Yeah, they played together. Yeah, they played together.
That's something.
Yeah. So he's the guy that I've kind of been like, if there's because not only do I think yet to the point you're making, you want that additional kind of insurance policy behind Mitch, but also you can play Horford with Karl-Anthony Towns. You might be able to get away with playing Horford with Mitch in certain matchups, especially in the regular season. It just gives you different looks. You can go 5 out, I think, which is interesting with Cat and Horford. So you can play double big and
you
stay
can
5 out
on the floor too. How many teams can go double big, 5 out, switch everything, right? Like, that's pretty rare.
You're right. So he's the guy that I've had kind of circled. Like, if there is a guy that you can go get and is worth Brock Aller having to pinch pennies in every way possible to make it work under the second apron, he's probably the guy that I would like to go get, which is amazing because I've spent most of my life rooting against Al Horford. All right, Sam, thank you so much for coming on. Please feel free to plug anything that you would like to plug.
Just read CBS Sports. We do a lot of good stuff. This time of year, I'm very busy. I'm publishing something every few hours. So read CBS Sports, Twitter at Sam Quinn CBS. But yeah, like this time of year, stuff's coming out early and often. So just follow the website. We've got stuff as it happens.
Best time of the year. Stacy, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Nothing to plug. Stacy Patton 89 on Twitter. Oh, I'll plug. Prez did a good piece on the draft. The Knicks have the 50th pick, and only psychos know who is going to be available and who the Knicks can get. Luckily, we have one at the Strickland, so check out his new piece. It's really good to get a primer. And the Knicks are in a position where we can use some cheap talent cheap young talent. So.
I will echo those sentiments. Check out Prez's piece. Check out his piece from last week on Tibbs if you haven't already. And Sam, thanks again for jumping on. That is our show for today. I hope everybody has a great week. Please stay cool as best as you can. And enjoy the draft. And I'll see you on Friday. Peace.